With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Lamed Dalid. We are continuing to expound on the Abaya, according to our Girsa, Hava Mesader Seder Hamarocha Mishma de Gemara Va'aliba da Abashol. We're going to be learning the Machloikes Tanoim, whether the Bozichin comes before the Musafim, or whether the Musafim comes before the Bozichin. And we're going to suggest Al Pi Chasidis, a certain common thread, a certain common way of thinking and understanding this type of machlokes. So let's speak it out right now. As the Alter Rebbe explains in the Maimer that we all learn when we are younger, relatively in yeshiva, Adam ki yakrev mikem, that every korban, a sacrifice, really has in it two different parts. There are two different steps. There is a korban as a sacrifice, as giving up. And indeed, the behema has to be sacrificed, the avodah of hiskafia. And then you have the concept of korban miloshen kiruv, of getting closer to Hashem. And the avodah of getting closer to Hashem is something that is mainly done with it begins to be done with the godly soul. And ultimately, the godly soul will also bring the animal soul close to Hashem. But that can only happen after the avodah of hiskafia. And we're going to see there's a concept of an animal, there is a korban made out of flour, and the difference between them also, as it's explained in Chassidus, is the animal is more the animal that has to be burnt, that has to be subdued, and the concept of flour, which is Michael Adam, that is representative more of the spiritual part of man, of the godly part of man, Michael Adam, that still has to come even closer to Hashem. We're going to link that also into the question whether Musaf comes before Bozichin, right? Makes sense. Or whether Bozichin comes before Musafim, because the Musaf korban is also an animal. The Bozichin, as we just learned, even though Bozichin is frankincense, but the Boziach is considered the part of the Lechem Hapanim breads, Michael Adam, made out of wheat. The Boziach is the part that goes to God, and that's matter, the shirayim, so to say, which are the lechem aponims. We're going to learn also the difference between the ketoides that is brought in the morning versus the ketoides that's brought in the afternoon, as is pointed out in the Mishnah, right? And Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, and the question is whether the ketoides comes before the evadim or after the evadim. And l'chayri here also, the underlying meaning of this difference will be, ketoides is the closest that we can get to God. We are becoming completely one with God. The animal, the evadim, is the burning of the fats, like the avodah of asay toiv and the avodah of surmira, which one comes first, and that maybe will explain the difference. We're going to learn more, we're going to elaborate more regarding the nesachim that are brought with the Talmud offerings. The nesachim literally means the libation, which specifically refers to the pouring of the wine, but really nesachim includes in it, right, the nesachim of a korban, both the flour and the wine that comes along with various korbanos, including with the Talmud offering. And on Daf Lamed Daled Amid Beis, we're going to be focusing on how they would warm the mikvah for the Kohen Gadol, especially if he was older, especially if he was an istanis, if he had a delicate nature, and it wouldn't work well with him going into very cold water. And that's going to bring us back to a Gevaldika topic that we learned a lot in Masechta Shabbos, but it's really a Shas topic, and that is, how do we view a davar she'ein mischaven? That means if I'm doing something and it's going to have, or it might have, a different type of consequence, not the one that I'm looking to get. Whether that is something that renders my action connected to that consequence, whether it's more removed from that consequence. Normally we know it's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon. Davar she'ein mischaven, let's not confuse that with malacha she'ein tzricha lagufa. By davar she'ein mischaven, right, Rabbi Yehuda, who's the machmir, holds it's asur midrabanan. Rab Shimon will hold davar she'ein mischaven is completely permitted. It's completely mutter. We're going to review something that we learned Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Gimel, that prior to Abaya's hearing the concept of psikresha from Rava, and ultimately him also agreeing, both Abaya and Rava both say at the end that even Rab Shimon is moida, that even when there is a davar she'ein mischavin, but if it's for sure going to cause the consequence which is prohibited, psikresha v'lo yamus, even Rab Shimon is moida that it's going to be asur. And not only that, we're going to learn that it's maybe even also on a biblical level. It's completely chayiv. But if it's not a psik reisha, then Rabbi Yehuda, who's the machmer, holds it's only aser midrabanan. Rabbi Shimon holds davar she'em eschavin is completely mutter. We will see a toisvus on daf lamed daled on a base punkt here in Yoma that by other isurim other than Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda will hold davar she'ein meschavin is going to be aser midoraisa. That Rabbi Yehuda, even Rabbi Yehuda, who's the machmer, only holds it's aser midrabanan only by Shabbos, because of by Shabbos we need to have a malachas machshavas and a lot more about that topic. And if we'll have time, which we'll have time because it's a relatively in quantity a shorter daf, we're going to start the Mishnah daf lamed daled amid beis that's going to continue with the avodah of the Kohen Gadol, specifically the second time he goes to the mikvah. Second mikvah is already in an area of Kodesh. Second mikvah was built on top of the chamber called the Beis HaParva, and a lot more. So let us start on the Daf Daled, Amud Aleph. We left off on the second line from the top of the Amud. The Gemara is continuously quoting another step in the Abaya Hava Misader, and the Gemara again, we're looking for sources either in scripture or we're looking for a svara that explains the din kedima. And we already had on Daf Lamed Gimel that something was asked of Abaya, and he said, I don't know. Mishma de Gemara. The Ikir, we're doing it because that's the tradition. We're just doing our best to understand in the understanding of the reasons behind it. So one step is now that the mincha comes before the chavitin. In other words, right after they would burn the oila, and again, that goes back to the payas sheni, and we learned about by the Talmud, there were 6 Kohanim that were involved. 5 of them brought up the limbs, the 6 brought the kirbayim. After that comes the mincha. But the mincha came before the chavitim. Chavitim is not related at all to the carbon tamid, but chavitin has a similarity to the mincha, that it is a flour offering that has to be brought every day. It belongs to the Kohen Gadol. It's being brought on behalf of the Kohen Gadol. It's also divided in half in the morning, half in the afternoon. So the half in the morning is brought, right? The mincha comes before the chavitim. Now the question is, why not the chavitim before the mincha? Why are we connecting right after the animal comes the mincha? Well, you can answer that it's logical, because don't forget that the mincha is really not a standalone carbon. The mincha is the nesachim of the carbon oila. It's connected to the carbon tamid, so it should go together. But the Gemara is bringing a pasuk, because it says, and this is a quote of a pasuk, oila umincha. Right, the pasuk is in Parshas Emor. It says, "Eilo mayadei Hashem." Right, we are familiar with this pasuk because we say this by Kiddush and Yom Tov. Asher at daytime, Asher tikru oisam mikroi kodesh lahakrev ishay lashem oila umincha. So the word mincha is mentioned in the Chumash after the word oila. Now I just want to quote the continuation of the pasuk because it will be used again. And the pasuk says it's oila umincha zevach unesachim dvar yoim beyoimai. So now we're quoting back to Abaya Hava Mesader. The chavitin now precede the nusachim. Why? So the Gemara says shum mincha. That's already a svara. Like we mentioned, since the chavitin is made out of flour, it comes from the same ingredients as the mincha. So it's in the category of mincha. So we juxtapose it, we connect them one with the other. Then Abaya goes on to say that the nusachim, and that's the last step, which was the pouring of the wine. That was the 9th coin or the 13th coin, any way you want to count it. That won the lottery for it. That nesachim comes before the musafim. So says, why is that? Because it says, as we said in the pasuk, zevach unesachim. We have to link the nesachim to the zevach. And not after you finish bringing the mincha part, maybe do the musaf, because you're doing the musaf, at least you're putting together animal and animal as close as you could. You can't do that. You have to finish the carbon in totality, because the pasuk says that with the zevach, after the zevach comes all of the nesachim, including the last one that we're talking about, the pouring of the wine. Then Abaya continues, and he says, now everything that we learned until the nesachim limusafim, that's every weekday. Don't forget that the nesachim precedes the musaf. Obviously, that's only on the special days in which we bring a carbon musaf. Okay, now the carbon musaf, Abaya holds, comes before the bazichin. Fnekti Gemara, upa, that's already subject to a machloikes, aiva hatanya, that on Shabbos, and that's only on Shabbos, not even on Yom Tov, the bazichin, which was the matid for the lechem upon him, clearly should come before the musafim. So the Gemara says, Tanoyi, and actually, this is something that we already learned in Masechtas Pesachim and Daf Nun Ches. Rashi brings it that the machlokes Tanoim is a machlokes Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. And again, the question, the underlying question is that the bozichin is connected to the wheat, it's connected to Michael Adam, it's connected to the godly soul, so to say. The musaf is still an animal carbon. So which one do you have to work upon first? And that's a continuous discussion that we all have. And sometimes we tell a yid, do a mitzvah, bring out your godly soul. That will bring so much light into your life that you'll be more inspired, you'll be more empowered to subdue your animal. Sometimes you tell a yid, no, get rid of that activity. Sacrifice that animal. Because when you have that with you, your godly soul cannot come closer. So that's the question, whether Musaf comes before the Bozichin, or whether the Bozichin comes before the Musafim, and that's connected to Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, which is the Avoid of Atzadik, the Avoid of the Baal Tshuva, and the Vidal. Amar Abaye, says Abaye, Mistabra, command the Amar, Musafim Kodem LeBozichin. And this is going to be based on scripture, and this is indeed what Abaye says. So why is he siding with one side? Because it's Mistabra. Lav mi Amrat. Did we not say in last Dav that when the Torah doesn't say the word boiker once, but whenever it says in the morning, the double in the morning implies even earlier. Lahagdim, gavaldik. So hachinami, regarding the bozichin, where it says biyoim HaShabbos, look inside the Chumash. It says biyoim twice. Biyoim means in the day. Biyoim is the opposite of aboiker. Aboiker means earlier. Biyoim means in the day. So if the Torah repeats B'yom HaShabbos twice, it means later in the day. La'acher. And la'acher therefore would mean, la'acher, why what? I mean, obviously, there's not even a havamina to bring the bozichin before the Talmud in the morning. That's a klal, right? What did we learn? That the first thing, on top of the Amid, that oila, he oila reshayna, cannot come before the carbon oila. And the carbon oila already comes with it as the Seder HaPasik, right? Oila u'mincha, zevach u'nesachim. It's not shayach. So the only havamina, the only question as to should you bring the bozichin earlier in the day or biyoim meaning la'acher, that's only vis-a-vis the musafim. And that's exactly what God means according to Abaya. That's why he's siding with the Tana that holds that the musafim dafka comes before the bozichin. Says the Gemara, now that he has such a good proof, so how can there be what's the other side? So now my Tama demand the Amar that the bozichin should come the musafim, I shteitach biyoim twice. So the answer is the Gemara. You're having a source in the Chumash. I have an opposite source. Gomar chuka michavitim. So Rashi says, look inside Rashi, chuka by chavitim. The Torah uses the words chak oilam, lashem kolil taktar. By the bozichin it says chodesh kadoshim hi loy meishay Hashem chak oilam gavaldik. So he had a tradition. Again, you're not done gzeira shava. Elam Cain, you heard it from your Rebbe, but he had a chuka. So therefore, since it's connected to the chavitin, we bring it closer to the chavitin. So the Gemara says, hold on, if it's taka chuka, imi hasam is ligmera kula milsa mahasam, bazoi, right, we should bring the bozichin even before the nesachim. That's a gavaldik question. So the Gemara says, he also holds that the biyoim twice, beneged the bozichin, indicates that you have to delay it. So the solution of do you have to do it earlier? Do you bring it closer, chuka? Do you delay it biyoim? So the solution will be, according to the other Tana, that right after you finish all of the steps of the morning Tamid, including the nesachin, then you bring the bozichin. At least you brought it earlier on, chuka. Abaya, however, siding with the other Tana that holds no. He doesn't have chuka. You can't make it up. If you never heard that tradition, all he has is biyoim. Double is to tell you that you delay it. Delaying it must mean, not delaying it all the way later, because don't forget again, you can't bring anything after the Tamid Shel Bein Hu Arbayim. So it's Musaf, and then the Avodah of the Bozichin. And indeed, in our Siddur, that's how we do it. Right, every Shabbos, right after Musaf, in the Siddur, after Altira, after Ach Tzadikim, that is where we read the Parsha of the Bozichin after Musaf and the Lechem upon him. Gewaldig. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shar kol yom dvarim. The Gemara is referring back to the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Aleph Amid Beis. The Mishnah says, "Ketoyre shel shachar, hoysa koreva ben dam le'evarim." Now we are already familiar with the machlokes between the Rabbanan and Abba Shaul, and it sounds like our Mishnah is a third shita, which we really try to avoid. Frek the Gemara Mani, who is the author of our Mishnah? If our Mishnah is following the Rabbanan, right? What is the Rabbanan? We're speaking about the Rabbanan that argue with Abba Shaul. The Rabbanan are the ones that hold that the Ketores is brought in between the Avodah of the Haftavas Haneros, between the 5 and the 2. So then, Ben Dam Lineros Miboye. Now, Lineros would mean all of the Neros, obviously. So look inside the Rashi. Ben Dam Lineros Miboye, Ben Avodas Adam Le Avodas Haneros means Koidem Sheigmanem. It should have been emphasized that Ketores is done before you finish the Neiros. No one says that the Ketores is brought before you begin the Neiros, but it is before the Neiros. And if it goes according to Abba Shaul back in the Gemara, so what does Abba Shaul hold? First you finish all the Neiros, and then you bring the Evarim. So it should have said, Bein Neiros le'Evarim. Bein Dam le'Evarim sounds like a third shita. Is there a third shita? So the Gemara says something very important. Really, our Mishnah is the Rabbanan. It cannot go with Abba Shaul. Abba Shaul would have emphasized it's bein neiros le'evarim. Elama, why doesn't the Mishnah say, as the Gemara says, bein dam le'neiros? Because our Mishnah, Daf Lamed Aleph, besidra loy komayra. In other words, we're not dealing with the precise order of the avodah. So it's good enough. It's not wrong. Abaya was the one that was teaching us this specific Seder one after the other. But when you're just speaking generally about the Avodah of the Ketores, and especially as we'll learn in 2 lines from now, that what the Mishnah really wants to point out is the differentiation, the difference between when the Avodah of the Ketores is done vis-a-vis the Evarim, morning and the afternoon. That is what we're focusing on. But the other steps and the specifics of the other step is something that we don't need to be precise in the Mishnah. And again, what are we focusing on? How the Ketores of the morning comes dafka between the Dam and the Evarim, which is taka the way it was. In the afternoon, weiter, going back to the Mishnah, Sholbein Arbayim, the Ketores was brought dafka after the Evarim. It was before the Nesachim. But again, here we have this difference. Is the Ketores brought on the altar before you burn the limbs? And the burning of the limbs is the greatest avodas birurim. It's fats. There's a machloikes between the evarim and the fire. That is the classical meaning of a korban. You're sacrificing something. You're letting go of something that doesn't want to be let go of. The Ketores is min hakotze el hakotze. It's the ultimate connection to God. So which one do we do first? So it's a gavaldik thing. In the morning, says the Mishnah, before the Evarim. It fits with how we are explaining it. That means you tell a Yid, you got to sacrifice your animal soul. It's very difficult. First, get close to God. Have a ruchniisdik experience. You are now empowered to give up your Evarim, the fats that are not kosher. But that's only in the beginning of the Avodah. Let's say that Asay Toiv comes before Sur Meirah. Once the Yid is already after the whole day of work, then we demand of you, give up your Evarim, a little bit more Iskafia, and then you can reach to the ultimate level of Ketores. Now we know Hanamili, let's find the source in the Chumash, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, the Amar Kra, and we're looking at the Parsha in Pinchas, where it says, Keminchas haboiker ucheniskoi ta'aseh. This is referring to the afternoon tamid, that it should be like the mincha of the morning, like the libations, it shall be done. So what's the comparison? Ma minchas haboiker. Just like when it comes to the morning mincha, the rule is the Ketores comes before the Nesachim. Afkan, the Ketores has to come before the Nesachim. But before the Nesachim, in the afternoon, it's going to mean after the Evarim. But that will be mamash a problem. It's not a solution, it's a kasha. If you're telling me that we're using the comparison that the Torah gives between the afternoon should be like the morning, so make the afternoon like the morning. Don't make any differences. The Ketores is even before the Evarim. It's not only before the Nesachim, it's before the Evarim. So why don't we say Afkan that the Ketores in the afternoon should be Koidemes le'Evarim, And dafka, that's the whole point of the Mishnah, that the afternoon's Ketaitis was brought after the Evarim. So the Gemara says that you don't understand what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. The emphasis wasn't only on the comparison, but that the Torah compared it miksiv ke'evore or ke'evrei haboiker. No, the Torah is comparing it dafka to the mincha of the morning. To tell you, ke'minchas haboiker and dafka not v'loi ke'evrei boiker. It's like in between the lines. Don't make it like the Evarim. How is it not like the Evarim in this Nakuda? That Shal Shachar, it came, the Ketaitis, came before the Evarim. You have to do the Dam. So there's always going to be one step of Sur Meirah first. But after the Dam, Ketaitis, then the Evarim. In the afternoon, at the end of one's Avodah, Halacha Kibay Shammai, when Mashiach will come, right, the Gvura is going to be Goiver, first burn the Evarim. And only then can a Yid reach the ultimate level of Ketaitis, of Kesher with the Eibishter. All right, nice. Says the Gemara by Tanach Rabbanan. We're going to learn a little bit more about the nesachim that are brought with the Evarim. When it says, continuing with the Psukim and Parshas Pinchas, that v'niskoi revi'is hahin. How much, what's the quantity of the nesachim? So here we are focusing on wine because we're speaking about a liquid measure. Chevra, a hin, right? It's good to be chazer. A hin is 12 loig. A hin is 12 loig. And we learned the differences, like when you bring a par, when a big animal, when a big oxen comes with nesachim, there the Torah says that the nesachim has to be a half a hin, 6 loig. Right, remember the goat is going to be a third of a hin. And that is, or the ayil, I'm sorry, take that back, an ayil, we had that in Shkolim. Ayil is a 2-year-old animal. Within the 2 years, from 14 months, not a palgus, but from 14 until years. When you have a lamb, here we brought the smallest amount of wine, and that is a quarter of a hin. In other words, 3 loig. So now the question is, when it says it's niskoi is reviyas ahin. Now the Torah is not telling you the quantity for both the morning and the afternoon. That we already compared together. Right, because it says Kiminchas haboiker ucheniskoi tase. Question is, what's the source, what's the teacher, and what's the student? So it's fascinating. A machlokes tanoim. The Tanakama understands that Yilmad Shachris Mishal Arvis. Why? Look inside the Rashi, 6 lines from the bottom. That regarding the Tmidim, where the Torah says this pasuk that the nesachim is in the amount of a quarter of a hin, 3 loig, the Torah says ha'echad, that one of them needs the nesachim. The ha'echad, according to the Tanakama, is referring to the afternoon mincha. Why does the Tanakama understand that we are speaking about the afternoon? Because the pasuk above the one that we just quoted said ve'esakeves hasheni taseben harbayim. So we just spoke about the afternoon one. So it is regarding the afternoon one that the Torah says the quantity of nesachim. And now that we have the pasuk that we just learned above, that keminchas habayker ucheniskoi, that the nesachim, the quantity is of the same amount, so we learn the morning from the afternoon. The source is the afternoon, and the student, the derivative is the morning. So says the Tanakama, Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis. Rebbe says, no, that actually the pasuk of v'niskoi reviyas ahin is speaking about the morning. The morning is the source. And now we learn Arvis Mishal Shachris. And look inside the top of Rashi. Rebbe Omer Shal Arvis Mishal Shachris, because the lekeves ha'echad, even though chronologically the Torah just spoke about the afternoon, the ha'echad is referring back to the Shachris. Why is that? Because the afternoon Talmud is called keves hasheni. And here it says ha'echad. So the echad is going where it says esakeves ha'echad tase baboiker. So the Gemara says bishlam el rabbanon, like we just mentioned, hay b'tamid shel ben arbaim ksiv. The pasuk with the quantity follows the pasuk that was speaking about the afternoon tamid. So mistabra, that the Torah is going on the Seder, the quantity is about the afternoon one, and then we already know the morning has to be like the afternoon. But according to Rebbe, why does he teach this pasuk going back to the morning? So we just read this in Rashi, so Amar Abba Bar Ula, Amar Kra, here it says like keves ha'echad. So that's a code. And a zeo keves, shenemar bo yechad, that's only the Talmud shel Shachar. Gevaldik. Why v'Rabbanan? The Rabbanan teach that the word echad is not a hint to which one are we referring to. No, we're referring to the afternoon. The Torah is going on the Seder. The word echad means miyuchad shebeidra. It has to be the most special one. Now, if you remember, the Lishkas HaTaloyim, they had a minimum of six lambs. So many details. And there was another din, guys, remember that they needed to be inspected against blemishes, that they don't have blemishes at least for 4 days. So don't think that since all of the lambs that are available in the Lishka are equally halachically good, they are all unblemished, they all had the 4-day. No, even then, always look to get the best. How do you know that? From ha'echad. Now, the Rebbe, he doesn't need to use the ha'echad for that din. He agrees to the din. That you always have to pick the most special one, the meyuchad. But that we know from a general pasuk that we have regarding all karbanos, a pasuk that we have in Parshas Re'eh, where it says that mi b'mifchar nidorecha. It says v'choil mifchar nidrechem. That's the exact pasuk over there. Mifchar means from the choicest one. The Rabbanan say, yeah, you're right that you have this generic pasuk. But since that pasuk is speaking about nidrechem by default means a voluntary carbon. Now that you made a vow, you have to bring it. But it's not the daily carbon that is a chiyuv. Chad b'choyve v'chad b'nadava. And the Rabbanan hold that we would not learn one from the other. So we need to have both the mifchar, right, nidrechem. We have to have the echad to tell you the din of meyuchad shebeidroi. So the echad cannot be referring to the morning one, so therefore they follow the chronological Seder HaPasik. Now what's the vitzricha? Sometimes the Gemara elaborates, almost always the Gemara elaborates. Here, for whatever reason, the Gemara expects us to understand why one cannot be learned from the other. So our teacher Rashi will be helpful. Look inside Rashi, second line from the top of the Amid. What's the tzricha? Yesh, tzad, noite. On one side you can argue that shahanadava tzarech leyapoisa. The whole point of an adava is you're trying to give a gift. So that's a word. If you're giving a gift, go all the way. Go all the way. If you're not going all the way, don't even give a gift. Interesting. So one would think that if you're obligated to bring a carbon and you do something that's kosher but it's not beautiful, it's fine because you're doing it not because you want it. You're doing it because you're mechuyev. If you're making a commitment, if you're making an adava, dafka here, you're doing it all the way. However, the last Rashi on top of the Gemara, the opposite. That the attitude, this is gavaldik, that adarabba, when something is a chayv, for it not to become mitzvahs anosha milumada, the only way you can do that is by being mahadir in the mitzvah. If you're doing something that to begin with is an adava, just the fact that you're doing it, right? You're getting one flower, shaying good, because you are not mechuyev to do anything. Fakir dafke that which is a chayva, dafke over there you have to be mahadir. Now the emes is you need to be mahadir by both. But the Chachamim hold since you cannot learn one from the other, so the ha'echad which is needed to teach you the din of meyuchad shebeidroi is not available for it to be used. That ha'echad refers to the morning, and therefore, whereas Baruch, normally when you read the psukim, you follow the chronological order. Normally, there could be exceptions, and since the Torah just spoke about the afternoon Talmud, so therefore the quantity is also a continuation of the afternoon Talmud. Of course, the morning and the afternoon have the same amount. But I just want to add one final Alpi Chasidus, and that's another mimer from the Alter Rebbe regarding the Nesachim. Just to remember, there are certain mitzvahs that are paired together. The Alter Rebbe explains Talis and Tefillin, but the Alter Rebbe, this is I think in Shlach, where the Torah introduces for the first time the mitzvah of Nesachim, and we had a whole sugya whether there was Nesachim in the Midbar, or some Nesachim. There's definitely a huge additional amount of Nesachim that was only introduced after we entered Eretz Yisrael. And the Alter Rebbe explains that a carbon is the concept of Ratzoi, and Nesachim, even physically, when you burn an animal, the smoke goes up. When you pour the libations, the wine goes down. That Nesachim is the concept of Shuv. How ironic is it that when we make a l'chaim, which is when we drink wine, l'chayra, it doesn't do shuv at all. It takes us away. It's a ratzoi. But on the mizbeach, it's ratzoi and shuv. And the Alter Rebbe explains that's why the parsha of Nesachim was given after, I think it was after the Chet HaEgel, because that was their mistake. They only wanted the ratzoi without shuv. And here again, l'chayra, this question is, when are we focusing on the avodah of shuv? Now, both in the morning and the afternoon. But what's the ikr? I think that's also very significant. You think about it. No, is the avodah of shuv dafka in the morning, or in the afternoon? Maybe in the afternoon because in the morning you daven, go on ratzoi, if you're going to work, Abreira Hastu, life is going to make you become grounded. The Shuv can be pushed from the Avodas Hayoim, perhaps. Eloma, you have to be told at night, that even at night, and you're doing a Cheshbon HaNefesh, there always has to be a component of Shuv. Maybe that's the Iker emphasis of the Tanach. Okay, Chavre, let's go weiter. The Mishnah says that Im Hoya Kohen Gadol Zaken, or Yistenis. No, it's the default was the mikvah was cold, and Chavre, the mikvah must have been very cold, because you're speaking about Yerushalayim, and you're speaking about Yom Kippur. You're speaking about Yom Kippur. You know, one of the reasons that Rambam says, the Gemara says, that a Kohen Gadol, as learned as he was never allowed, nor a king, to be involved in establishing the calendar. That's because they were negei b'davar. And what was the negiyas by the Kohen Gadol? The Kohen Gadol would want Yom Kippur to be as early as possible. He would not want for a year to be a leap year, because when the year is not a leap year, then Yom Kippur, that's the vart, when he has to go and to the mikvah 5 times, it won't be closer to fall. It will be closer to summer. It will be warmer. But if it was cold and he's a zaken, so then you needed to warm up the mikvah. Now the Mishnah gave a simple solution. The mikvah says that you warm up water obviously before Yom Tov. You can't warm up water on Yom Tov. And then on Yom Tov you take these pre-warmed cauldrons and you pour it into the mikvah. And it cools it down. So the Gemara brings a braisa that tells us another mechanism that they used. Tanya, we learned, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, that ashoshiyois shel barzil, blocks, iron blocks, hoya mechamen me'erev Yom Kippur. It was left on top of fire. And for those of us who did Hagala, not with the iron, but with these stones, oy gevalt, when you put something hot on fire, it becomes mamish hot. And on Yom Kippur, Matilde, they would throw it into the mikvah. They would obviously grab it with tongues, and they would throw it into the mikvah, for you to lose some of the chill of the water. L'chayda, this system was a lot more effective than hot water, because the source, you're throwing the source into the water. Now, the Gemara is going to go, we're going to go now a little bit into Hilchos Shabbos, as we spoke on in the intro. Frek the Gemara, how are you allowed to do that? V'haloi mitzaref. Mitzaref means that you are hardening the iron. Now, this is very important. If the iron would have been a bona fide keli, then the final step of finalizing and making the keli into a functional keli, which can be called the MERCAVA patish, is a malacha d'oraisa. Let's make that clear. Don't forget, we're not speaking about a proper keli. It's not that there is a pot that was never finished, it was not finalized yet. And the final step of making iron kalim was heating them up on a very high level and then cooling them off. Here we're speaking about blocks of iron. That means even after you're going to be metzarefit, you're going to harden them. It's not a keli really. So as we'll see in the Gemara, it's going to be Yasen midrabanan. It's important to point that out. But let's begin. The MERCAVA patish is one of the malachas. So Amar Rav Bibi, it must be that the taka were not allowed to heat it up on the level that if it's now going to be thrown into cold water, which is what the mikvah was, came from the mayon, then it would become hardened. If it's not very hot, then throwing it into the cold water will not harden it even more. That's one answer. Abaye says that, and then that's already a little bit harder, Pashut, because how do you know what the temperature is? Abaye says, no, even if it's taka that hot. Even if it's taka that hot. And when you're going to throw it into the mikvah, it will benefit. It's going to finalize the koyach, the hardness of the iron. We don't have a problem. Why is that? Because davar she'ein mischaven is muter. Oh, because that's not your intention. Let's go now to the suga of davar she'ein mischaven. Now, right over here, if you can notice the Tosfos that begins on daf lamed daled amud beis. I mean, look at this Tosfos. Lamed daled amud beis, lamed hey amud aleph. Wow. So some of what the discussion of Tosfos, he brings the aruch. Tosfos many times brings the aruch. Just to share quickly the words, that even by a psikresha, we say in Shulchan Aruch, Deloy nichalei. Tosfos used the word she'eina hena klal. She'eina hena klal. There's no hana at all. So that's not called psikresha. So that's, the psikresha topic is discussed a lot. I want to add something else. Maybe Abaye is behemshich to Rav Bibi. In other words, you don't even know for sure if the iron got hot enough that now that you put it into the mikvah, you cast it, you were mitzaref it. You don't know for sure. maybe that's Abaya's behemshech to Rabbi. It's not that you're putting it on the fire, let it become red hot. But like we mentioned, yes.
Are we saying this concept of hardening the iron, it applies every single time you do it? So you could do it once, do it a second time, do it a third time, and every time it's getting harder?
So
do it once, then it's hard, and now we have hard iron, so you can just use it afterwards.
Okay, Danny, very good. I was thinking like this, that Ashashi Yosher Balzel, like I mentioned, is not a finished keli yet. I even think that if the Ashashi Yosher Balzel would have undergone too many times this mitzvah process, then it might have become very difficult to make a keli out of it. As we'll see soon in the Gemara, that Ashashi Yosher Balzel, to begin with, is not even when it becomes mitzaref, it's not a final product. You still are going to work with that iron. They didn't want to do it too many times. It was done the first time. They went over to an ironsmith and they told him, give us some iron that that you didn't use yet, and let us chap an iron and do something good for the Kohen Gadol.
Yeah, but I'm saying is, that this is an issue. Just do it once, heat it up, drop it in the cold thing.
Okay, could be. But let's go. Let's go with this. If davar she'ei mischaven is mutter, and we paskin like Rab Shimon, Abaya paskins like Rab Shimon, so there's not a problem. I want to say one thing over here, because again, people that learn this properly, the Tosfos has to be learned. But many Rishonim, if you're going to remember, on Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel, that is where we have mamish this topic. Over there, you're going to learn about this, and over there, Abaye is going to make a statement, and the Gemara is going to ask Psikresha, and the Gemara is going to just to know the history that in the beginning, Abaye did not subscribe to Psikresha. Look in Shabbos Kuf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. Abaye v'Rava the Amri Tarvayu Moed Rab Shimon b'Sikresha v'Leyamus. Yeah. The Gemara says later Abaye was Moed to Rab Shimon. Many Rishonim learned that this sugya here is prior to Abaye's subscribing to Psikresha. I know it's the easy way out, but let's take the easy way out because we're learning quickly. Okay, so let's side Psikresha. That will be important for the next level as well. The problem is that for Abaye to explain the Braisa based on Shitas Rab Shimon, l'cha'oira, this is going to be the problem that we know from elsewhere that Abaye paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. That will be the problem. Umi amar Abaye hachem. Does Abaye hold davar she'ei mischaven muter? No. The Tanya here it's clearly a case of psikresha. When it says in Parshas Tazria, right, ubayoim hashmini yimoil besar orlosoi, and like Rashi reminds us that the word besar is extra. The Torah could have written bayoim hashmini yimoil orlosoi, because that's what you're doing. You're cutting off the orla. Why does the Torah say bsar? So since Punktin Tazria, after the beginning of the mitzvah of Bris Milah, when the Torah continues with the dinim of tzoras, the Torah begins with Adam ki yihya ba'oir besaroi, basar. That's to tell you that afilu b'makim sheyesham beheres, even if there is one of the signs of tzoras known as a beheres on the orla, and what do we have? We have a lav in the Torah. The Torah says Hishamer benegat tzoras, and Hishamer benegat tzoras, we know, is a din that one may not cut off the actual tzoras. So you would think you can't do the bris. So that's what the Torah is adding, the word basar, that even if there is a beheres or any other of the Samani tzoras on the orla, nevertheless yakoitz. These are the words of Rabbi Yoshi. And guys, we're going to learn this in Eruvin, the whole sugya of Esod Chaloisa. Why did you even need this? But that's what Rabbi Yoshia says, that there is needed a basar to tell you that the mitzvah of Milah will override the lav of Hishamer b'negat tzoras. Now, v'havinan ba, and on that we asked in the yeshiva, we have to understand that kra lamali, why do we need to have a pasik? Why do we have it to have a pasik? And why not? Why not? Because that's not your intention. Your intention is only to do a bris. And Abaye answered, I tell you why we need a pasuk. The pasuk was needed because of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds davar she'ei mischaven is aser. And if not for the extra basar, even though your kavana is not to cut off the tzorah siman, doesn't matter. But it's davar she'ei mischaven is aser. Now the fact that Abaye is explaining Rabbi Yoshia, you need a pasuk because davar she'ei mischaven is aser, says Rashi, that's a raya that Abaye subscribes to the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. If Abaye would have pasken like Rab Shimon, he never would have faremfered Rabbi Yoshia using Rabbi Yehuda. So the question here is, we see that Abaye holds like Rabbi Yehuda. Why over here in our Mishnah is Abaye explaining the Braisa of throwing in the iron based on Shitas Rab Shimon if he doesn't paskin like Rab Shimon? And here we have an answer, and here that's a big machloikas Rashi Tosfos Pashut how to teach it. So let's go first to Rashi. Says that answers the Gemara. Hanamila. Hanamila means when do we say that Abaye holds like Rabbi Yehuda? That davar she'ein mischaven is asur, that's b'chol ha'torah kula. B'chol ha'torah kula says Rashi, that is when the issue is a biblical issue. If there's an isur, the oiraisa, and there it's happening even though it's ein mischaven, yes, Abaye paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. However, avol hachem, since tziruf, like we mentioned, fashioning this block of iron, not fashioning a pot, this block of iron, after it becomes hard, is still not a bona fide keli. Yes, it's only midrabanan. Since it's only midrabanan, here Abaye will paskin like Rab Shimon. And look inside the Tosfos. We have a little bit of time. So Tosfos quotes Rashi and Fakerti, make sure that we're not mentioning, Rashi doesn't mention anything about Ein Shvus Bamikdash. What Rashi is saying, a few lines into the Tosfos, the afilu ihava mischavin, even if you would have intent here to make the iron of the ashashis hardened like Yisur Deraisa. So therefore, kiloi mischavin loy gozro beirabanan, nowhere afilu b'medina. Tosfos understands it's not just what Abaye holds like Rabbi Yehuda. If Abaye holds like Rabbi Yehuda, the way he understands Rashi, it must mean that the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that davar she'ein mischavin is problematic only by an Isur Doiraisa. If it's an Isur Derabanan, not that Abaye paskins like Rab Shimon, Abaye paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. By Isur Derabanan, even with Rabbi Yehuda, there's no issue with davar she'ein mischaven. So is understood b'shitas Rashi, and that's the whole problem that Tosfos has. That we know throughout, and he brings so many rayas, that the machloikas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon regarding davar she'ein mischaven is the same by Doiraisa and the same by Derabanan. And therefore he has a whole different shot. And let's go 4 lines under the Gemara. 4 lines under the Gemara. And Tosfos says Gavaldik. And this is so important. Tosfos explains that Rabbi Yehuda holds davar she'ein mischaven. I know we chazer this on Shabbos. We should review it. Malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. That's worse. In both cases, Rab Shimon is lenient, but by Malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, Rabbi Yehuda says chayiv. That means it's asur doiraisa, chayiv chatos, and Rab Shimon says it's only asur, pater al asur. By davar she'ein mischaven, everyone goes down a notch. There, Rabbi Yehuda says it's only asur midrabanan. Rab Shimon holds it's mutar legamri. Says Tosfos, whoa, not so quick. Rabbi Yehuda b'chol ha'torah kula means if it's not an isur Shabbos, holds davar she'ein mischaven is asur doiraisa. Abaye paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. Eloma, by Hilchas Shabbos, even Rabbi Yehuda, who's machmer, at least will hold it's not asur midoiraisa. Why? Because of the concept of Shabbos of Meleches Machsheves Asra Torah. This is great. Because by Shabbos there's a greater emphasis when it comes to the violating Shabbos, God forbid, that you have to do so with greater intent, with more mindfulness. And therefore, since on Shabbos to begin with, on all Meleches Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda will hold that davar she'ein mischaven is only yasin midrabanan. We're not focusing at all on the fact that the keli is not a bona fide keli. Even if the keli would have been a pot, and that will be the first time that it's going to be thrown into cold water after it being fired up, doesn't matter. Davar she'ein mischaven, that's the way we paskin. Rabbi Yehuda holds it's asur, not chayiv. And now adds Tosfos, where are we doing this? In the Beis Hamikdash. Even Rabbi Yehuda is moida. That was the whole siyum of Eruvin, right? That ain't shvus b'mikdash. There are exceptions, but ain't shvus b'mikdash. Gavaldik. That's huge. So Tosfos is telling us that Rabbi Yehuda holds davar she'ein mischaven is chayiv, b'chol ha'torah kula midoraisa, only by Shabbos he's lenient. Rashi is telling us that Rabbi Yehuda only is machmir by an isur doiraisa. By an isur derabanan, the way Tosfos understands, b'chol ha'torah kula, not connected to Shabbos, not connected to Shvus B'Mikdash. By isur derabanan, to begin with, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't have an issue with davar she'ein mischaven. in any ways, in either way, Abaye holds like Rabbi Yehuda, but Abaye is justified by explaining that it doesn't have to be that you know that this metal is not going to become a tzuraf, if that's the right word. No, it doesn't matter. Even if it's going to happen, and I paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, in this case, davar she'ein mischavin is going to be permitted. I just want to add, if you're going to teach that this entire Gemara is only prior to Abaye's describing of Psik Reisha, then everything is going to change. If this goes together with the Psik Reisha, or like Tosfos points out, it has to dafka be that you don't know for sure it's going to get hardened. So then even later when Abaye was Moide to Rava, we stand with that interpretation. But if this entire interpretation is based on Abaye's rejection of, or not knowing yet, not accepting yet of Psik Reisha, but we do know that there is a concept of Psik Reisha. And by Psik Reisha v'lo yamus, actually, according to most, it doesn't only become Asur D'Rabbanan, it becomes Asur D'Oraisa. All of that will affect this concept of throwing hot metal into a mikvah on Shabbos or on Yom Tov to cool it off. Nowadays, just another thing that you should just be aware that when it comes to warming up the mikvah, it's taka something of controversy. Not everyone is that comfortable with the hot mikvah, but by Hasidim, we indeed do have hot mikvahs on Shabbos, and we'll speak about this more, God willing, in another time. Okay, Chevra, let us continue learning the Mishnah. The Mishnah says like this. He went to the mikvah, right? The first Mishnah was, he dafke went on top of Sharamayim, and the mikvah was b'choil. That's because ein adam nichnas la'azara, la'avoida, afilu toyer, achi yitboil. We covered all that. Now he's already in middle of avoida. Now he already did the first step in Big Day Zohav. Now he's going to get changed into Big Day Lovin for the first time to do the avoid of the par and the soyer and the ketayres lefnai v'lefnim. For that he has to go to the mikvah. So he view lebeis haparva. We're speaking about the second story in which there was a mikvah. And if you remember in the beis haparva, what did we have in Tosfos? The roof over there, right? Tosfos daf lamed aleph amud aleph was on the same height of the floor of the Azara. That's also why when Abaye was bringing a raya, when the Gemara was bringing a proof, that the Abaye brought a proof that the Ein Eitam was 23 amas plus above the ground, it was dafka from the mikvah on top of Sharamayim. So it was stuck on the second story, but it was, everything was on an incline. So it was built in a way that the second story of the Shar HaParve was Shavel Karka Azara. But that's not negay here, just going back to that Tosfos. So he went to the Beis HaParve, and that had the status of Kodesh. It was sanctified. And here again, for modesty, they would create some sort of temporary mechitza. And because of it being Yom Kippur, and the uniqueness about Yom Kippur is expressed by the Kohen Gadol's dafka wearing Big Day Lavan, so Peirs Usadin Shalbutz Beinei Lebein Ha'am. And now we're going in through the other detail that we learned about last week. And this Mishnah obviously shitas the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan, beginning with, the Rabbanan are the ones that hold that the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, both prior and post, is done when he's dressed. So first, Kiddush Yadav V'Raglav. Then Ufashat. And you can add the word etc. Everything else we learned before. Right? So Yarad, and he went to the mikveh, and Olav, and a Stapag, and again Kiddush Yadav V'Raglav. However, here's where Rav Meir, that's the source. Rav Meir Omer, no. That he didn't wash his hands, sanctify the hands and the feet prior to getting undressed. The first Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim was dafka when he was undressed. Rav Meir Omer Pashat, first he gets undressed, then Kiddush Yadav V'Raglav, then Yarad V'Taval, then Olav and Estapog. Here Rav Meir has to go through the whole Seder because Rav Meir doesn't want you to think that he argues with both. He only argues with the Kiddush Koydem. Hevi like Big Day Lovin. Even with Rav Meir, he would get dressed. The Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim after mikvah was done dressed. And now the Kiddush Yadav V'Raglav. Is there a shita that argues? Yes. L'Rab Chizda l'Rebbe. Not according to everyone. Let's go right. Now, second part of our Mishnah. Interestingly, we're going to start speaking about the value of the Big Day Lavan that he wore. How many times did he go into Big Day Lavan? Guys, we learned this last week. So there was the gold in the morning. Then there was the Big Day Lavan. Then Vayikra Tazayin Pasuk Chav Dalid. Because then he went from Big Day Lavan, he went back into Big Day Zav to bring Eloi ve'el ha'am. Big Day Zav. Then he would go through all of these steps of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, getting undressed, L'Rabbanan, getting dressed for Big Day Lovin, and in that Big Day Lovin, he would go into the Holy of Holies to remove the ladle and the coal pan. We're going to call the latter going into the Holy of Holies to remove the afternoon entry, because the first one was done in the morning, and the other one was done in the afternoon. So there was twice that he wore Big Day Lovin. They were not the same. Not only were they not the same, but there's an emphasis of making sure that the morning Big Day Lavan had more value, were more expensive, had more financial value than the afternoon ones. That's the Mishnah. Interesting. So says the Mishnah. B'shachar hoyu loivish pelusin. Pelusin is a certain type of linen. It's called pelusin linen. And it was the best linen. And how expensive was it? So it would cost shneim aser mana, 12 mana. Guys, 1 mana is 100 zuz. So shneim aser mana means 1200 zuz. Bein Arbayim, when he got dressed for the second time, after he did Eloi ve'el ha'am. And again, we're calling that Bein Arbayim because it was in the afternoon that he would go in for the second and final time. He would wear linen garments that were Hindu in. Now I know that Hindu today refers to India. Interestingly, that there's a machlekes amongst the Rishonim. Let's start with our teacher Rashi, that taiches, that the linen came from Eretz Hinduin, which is Eretz Kush. That's a whole topic. How can Rashi call this Kush? Kush is Ethiopia. Okay, we say that wherever it came from, it was of lesser value. And again, the Mishnah writes the number. Shal Shmeina Meir Zuz, 800 Zuz. Tosfos, I know after the Rabbi Yehuda that we quoted, the Tosfos on this Mishnah is on the bottom of Lamed Hey. Tosfos is wondering, why isn't the Mishnah consistent? Either speak about Zuz, right? So you should have written that in the morning one was 1200 Zuz, and the afternoon 800 Zuz. And if you begin with Mana, 12 Mana, write 8 Mana, which will be the same thing. One suggestion Tosfos gives is Shmoina Mana is like, well, there's certain words that are hard to say one after the other. It's a tongue tire, if that's the expression, tongue twister. So it's hard to pronounce it. Be that as it may, Rav Meir holds morning 1200, afternoon 800. The Chachamim agree with Rav Meir that the morning should be more expensive. But they have different numbers. The Chachamim Oimrim, no. B'shachar hoyelov shal shmeina aser mana. Wow, 1800 zuz. And shal bein arbayim shal shneim aser mana. The afternoon was also lesser, but the afternoon had the value of 1200 mana. And now the Chachamim do something that's never needed. They're adding up the math, right? You know that 18 and 12 is 30, but they have to say Harkel Shloisha Mana, and the Gemara is going to ask the question. We'll get to that in the Gemara. Now the Mishnah adds that this value, the money that was spent for both sets of Big Day Lavan, that's only if you were taking the money from Mishal Tzibur, which is what we learned in Shkolim from the half a shekel fund. Some of it went to buy these garments. Why are we emphasizing that? Because as we'll see, God willing, in the next daf, that there were certain Kaihanim Gedolim that they wore even more expensive garments. Now, if you want to buy a more expensive garment, you can't demand that the money should come from the communal fund. You want to buy something more expensive, Gesund hate. But Imratza Lohaisiv, Maisav, but Mishaloi. Maisav Mishaloi. Now, just to finish a few words, and we'll take this up in the next daf, that the begadim of the Kohen Gadol have many meanings, and just to be aware that we're speaking here about the Kotoinus, as we'll see in the Gemara. All right? B'shachar ha'yelovish, we're speaking about, not all of them, but the Kotoinus came to be mechaper al oven shvichas damim. And let's remember, my friends, that the Kohen Gadol had a very strong connection to murder, in the sense that if someone manslaughtered, right, b'shoigeg, and they have to go into galus, they're only freed up when the Kohen Gadol passes away. Which is why Chazal tell us that the mothers of the Kahanim Gedolim, they would prepare special foods. They would make the life of people that are in galus easier for them not to daven for the Kohen Gadol to pass away. So here also, as we'll see, that the Kohen Gadol, perhaps the Ben Yehoyada says this, is wearing very expensive kutainasin as a preventative measure that there should never be any type of manslaughtering, which will also serve to protect him, that no one should benefit by the passing of the Kohen Gadol. Chevra, God willing, to be continued.